In this brief lecture, we're going to examine the campaigns in North Africa in the period from 1940 to 43 during World War II. The backdrop to Italy's invasion of Egypt, which began this protracted period of warfare in North Africa, was a concept that dates back to the Roman era of the Mediterranean being an Italian lake, and Mussolini certainly was aware of his Roman roots as well as the cultural power of dominance in the Mediterranean to the Italian people. Mussolini was rather late, as you will learn from your readings, in joining the Axis powers in World War II, and by the time he launched this invasion and also another one in Greece, Hitler had achieved remarkable successes in continental Europe. Natural resources played a role in this decision to engage in warfare in North Africa. At this time, the Italians had a colony in Libya, but oil would not be discovered in Libya until the late 1950s. Oil was certainly a concern, but they were driving eastward with the hope of tapping into known oil fields in Romania and perhaps Persia. More importantly were strategic considerations, especially the control of the Suez Canal, and Mussolini believed if he could control the Suez Canal, he could bring the war to a quicker end because the British would not be able to resupply through the Suez. The invasion itself was launched from Libya, which again had been an Italian colony. Invasion of Egypt. Initially, the goal of the offensive was to seize the Suez Canal, but repeated delays and failures caused the Italians to settle merely for just attacking Allied forces in North Africa where they came upon them. The Italian offensives needed quick victories and the element of surprise, neither of which they achieved. Almost immediately, the British began a counter-offensive called Operation Compass. The initial goals of the British offensive were more akin to a large-scale raid, but rapid successes led the British to continue pushing forward. Allied forces advanced from inside Egypt to Libya, capturing 115,000 Italian prisoners. They destroyed thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft, and the British themselves only took a little under 2,000 casualties. At this point, Hitler was forced to bail out his Italian ally, as the Italian invasion in Greece at the same time had bogged down and it was becoming another debacle. This map examines Operation Compass and the rapid British successes in North Africa that caused Hitler to turn to a trusted subordinate. The man that Hitler turned to lead the Africa Corps was Erwin Rommel. He was a highly innovative tactician. One of the biggest innovations was the use of 88mm anti-tank guns as an offensive weapon in the war. However, he was a poor big-picture strategist and frequently took unnecessary chances. Often he was at the front line leading his troops, which caused them to be tied down. The Germans sent the Africa Corps 2 divisions under Rommel to bail out the Italians against the British. Although Rommel was ordered to just prevent the British from advancing any further, Rommel took troops on the offensive and pushed the British back past the farthest point of advance of the Italians earlier in the war. This map shows the direction of Rommel's first offensive in March through June of 1941. The city of Saloum was a place at which a stalemate emerged. The British reorganized their forces into the 8th Army. Both sides stopped and waited. Rommel, however, received few reinforcements, and the British counterattacked forcing the Axis troops all the way back to El Aguila. An Axis resupply convoy finally arrived, and Rommel counterattacked on January 21st of 1942. En route to Egypt, the Africa Corps recaptured the city of Tobruk on June 21st of 1942. The loss of Tobruk was an embarrassment to Winston Churchill, and one of the low points in the war for the British. Rommel was able to push the British back to El Alamein and almost captured Cairo before the British halted the German advance in the first Battle of El Alamein. The British artillery was devastating, and the RAF had near complete air superiority as the Germans were too far from their air bases. And what is known as the iron law of logistics worked in favor of the Allies here. The Germans were about 1,400 miles away from their main base at Tripoli. Only 20% of the supplies they sent actually reached Rommel. Most were destroyed by German air power. So Rommel was faced with a dilemma. He could neither go on offense, because he couldn't be resupplied effectively, and he couldn't retreat. And he found the best sources of supply were captured Allied material. El Alamein is about 100 miles west of Alexandria, Egypt. It's something of a natural bottleneck. It's an area where a coastal plain meets a high escarpment and lends itself well to defense. It was in some ways the last hope of the British in North Africa. Montgomery at this point had been appointed to lead the British 8th Army. In the 3 months between the first battle and the second Battle of El Alamein, British were able to gain a 2-to-1 advantage over Axis forces through a gradual build-up. One interesting ploy they used was to make supply trucks, or rather make tanks look like supply trucks to fool the Germans. And this caused Rommel to hold in the south with the Italians when he could have focused more of his forces in the north. Along the way, Rommel's troops laid 500,000 mines. And this continues to be, and even in the present day, an issue. There was a recent news story of children playing who were damaged by mines laid by Rommel's troops in World War II. This is a point at which the Allies moved toward a philosophy called Europe First, where they focused on beating the Nazis in Europe first. They would fight a holding action against Japan in the Pacific, and then after the defeat of Germany, if all went well, Allied forces could be concentrated against Japan. This map shows the area around the second and first battles of El Alamein. You can see the grayish shading shows high ground areas, and the pink shows low ground areas. So of course one of the keys to battle often is to gain the high ground. It's easier to defend and better from which to launch offensives. One of the advantages the British had in North Africa was access to what was at the time a state-of-the-art tank, the American Sherman tank. And the American industrial might was able to produce large quantities of material, such as the Sherman tank, to aid the British in their fight against the Nazis. At the second Battle of El Alamein, Rommel was actually sick at the start. He missed the first 2 days. The British began with a 20-minute artillery bombardment by some 900 guns. The Allies had a significant tank advantage over the Germans, almost 3-to-1. This was followed by an infantry advance across minefields to clear lanes for the tanks. The British sappers were the ones who cleared the minefield. This came from a French word, S-A-P-P-E, sape, which means spade, and refers to the fact that they were digging up mines. After the attack stalled, a strike to the North Front brought high casualties on both sides. The British launched what became known as Operation Supercharge. They ripped through Rommel's tank groups, forcing a retreat. This map shows the order of battle at the Second Battle of El Alamein, where forces were deployed. With the British advancing against Rommel after El Alamein, the Allies had amphibious landings on the western coast of Africa to surround the Axis. This is the first appearance of the Americans in the North Africa campaigns. The port cities of Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers were the initial drop-off points. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was chosen to command the invasion force because of animosity between the British and the French. And Vichy France controlled portions of North Africa at this time, and the Vichy French were still allied with the Germans. Among Eisenhower's weaknesses, not many, but he did lack battle experience at this time. In terms of strengths, he was something of a diplomatic genius, getting people to work well together. Very good at delegation, very good at planning. And at this time, also during Operation Torch, some of the Vichy French forces began to defect to the Allies, which reduced the number of casualties. This map shows the various amphibious landings by Operation Torch in the North Africa campaigns. By November of 1942, Axis forces had been pushed back to Tunisia, but they were not completely defeated at this time. After Rommel twice defeated the American Second Corps, General George Patton was given command of the corps. And between Patton and Field Marshal Montgomery, the Axis forces were driven back to the sea. They had no room to maneuver, they had few supplies, and British and Allied forces had almost complete air superiority at this time. Rommel, however, was able to inflict heavy casualties on the Americans at the Battle of Kasserine Pass, with few in return. It looked as though he might be able to drive across North Africa through Kasserine Pass. Realistically, given his poor supply situation, he probably wouldn't have gotten very far in North Africa. The Germans and Italians in North Africa surrendered on May 13th of 1943. The result was 250,000 POWs captured. At least half of those were German. In addition, Allied sea and air power resulted in only about 600 Axis troops escaping. Rommel, however, was one of the lucky ones. In terms of consequences for the Axis powers in the failed North Africa campaigns, things became rather grim. The oil fields of the Middle East did not fall to the Axis, and the Suez Canal remained in Allied hands. The Italian Navy and Air Force were almost completely annihilated. The victory in North Africa allowed for the invasion of Italy, which eventually led to the Italian surrender. U.S. troops and commanders gained valuable field experience in North Africa that would pay dividends down the road. Most importantly, I think, the campaign in North Africa, because of Mussolini's misadventures, pulled German troops away from the Eastern Front, and this helped the Soviet defense against the Germans in Operation Barbarossa.